on now, 30, 32, max keel.
SiFi, first of all, congratulations. What a leg. You must be pretty pleased with that.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pretty epic leg, this last leg from Newport to Aarhus. Yeah, and there was a lot on the line, I guess, because it was double points this leg. Yeah, pretty extreme forecast, or as it turned out, a pretty complicated but nice forecast to get across. But oh yeah, also a very intense leg with a lot of fast sailing. So it was, it was flat out from start to finish.
The intensity, that's what I want to sort of get onto straight away, because we know these boats are quick, but this leg, more than maybe some of the others, seems to have shown up just how brutal these boats are.
No, absolutely. And I think, we obviously had a pretty long and brutal leg in the Southern Ocean, but at this stage of the game and this stage of the race, and because this race was only 1 week long, it was pushed from start to finish, and there was no time to have any downtime or pace yourself. It was literally flat out all the way. If we weren't topping 30 knots every few seconds, then we probably weren't pushing hard enough. So it makes the things being pretty brutal on board.
Was it a combination of things as well, though? Because you had that extra pressure, and I heard you talk about that just as you finished. You were talking about the extra pressure, but I guess the conditions played in your favour as well, because it was relatively flat water, was it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The forecast for the leg was very interesting. We actually didn't know whether we were going to be able to get into those really nice, good wind and flat water conditions or not. So a lot of our weather preparation was talking about, are we going to get across this trough? What's going to happen? Is it going to form into a low pressure? How fast it's going to move? And that sort of really dominated our preparation, because the key to the leg was going to be getting to that new wind. As we saw, 3 out of the 4 boats made it across, and then that's what set us up for this really fast sailing. But there was a very strong high pressure in the Atlantic, which meant good wind, but actually also relatively flat water. So sea state is always the biggest impediment to performance on these boats, both because when you start crashing into the wave in front, it slows you down, and also how hard it is on the boat when you're slamming. You can get pretty fast reaching, but when you're slamming, sometimes you need to try and rein it in a bit. But to have these flat water conditions and good wind, set us up for a pretty epic ride across the Atlantic.
And how brutal was it? I mean, paint a picture. What was it like on board?
It's just fairly relentless on these legs, especially when you've got to push from start to finish, and all the sailing is fast sailing. We were lucky that the sea state wasn't too extreme, but with the foils on the boats, you're always up and down and slamming in and out of the water. You crash into the wave in front, you get a massive deceleration. You can easily be thrown across the boat, as we've seen in these legs. It's pretty hard living on board. Just doing the basic things like trying to boil water to make food, or use the toilet or anything, it becomes like a real challenge when you're slamming around and the boat's shaking, and then on top of all of that, there's sleeping, and it's kind of hard to sleep sometimes when you're getting bounced up and down every few seconds, but somehow we find a way.
But you say it's quite challenging. I'm sure it is, but it also sounds like it can be quite dangerous in that you slip or you fall. Pretty easy to break something, and then you've got a real problem. No,
absolutely. And funny enough, it sort of got brought to our attention last night, but the potential to have an injury is ever present, it can be, you could hit something, or it could just be a wave you go down in the boat. You slow from 30 knots to 8 knots or something like that, everybody gets flung across the boat and smashed into bulkheads and all of that. So I think in the future we'll start to see more and more people wearing helmets on these boats, and I'd say it's probably a good thing.
Yeah, I want to come on to that in a minute, because that particularly interests me as well. But just when you're talking about smashing into things, I mean, can you actually how do you move around the boat? Presumably you've got to be holding on all the time. You don't wander around and speed anyway.
If you look around on the boat, you'll see there's like handholds everywhere, whether it's rope loops or actual physical handles. They're well spread out on the boat, because you kind of have to jungle climb your way across or whatever, because the boat's shaking around, and you have to be quite deliberate about when you're going to come in and out the hatch or when you're going to move, because if you mistime it, you could fall or whatever. And on top of that, I actually spend quite a lot of time on my knees. When you're going quite fast and everything's starting to bounce up and down, then sometimes it's just easier to shuffle around on your knees. So we actually have quite a lot of foam on the deck, and that's all for my knees, basically.
How the hell do you navigate in those conditions as well?
It's certainly been a big challenge, and something we've sort of had to try and get our head around. It's quite nice in some ways. We have a big screen in the cockpit, and that sort of helps everybody see what's going on. But I guess on our boat we kind of lack a sort of really comfy nav station, so it's always there's a lot of navigating on the fly. But it kind of has to work like this as well, because with only 4 on board, then I'm required to do so much more sailing. So I try and fit my navigating in around the sailing and the watch system, and obviously at times we do change things up, and I jump out of the watch, and we'll do more of that in the last legs. but I try pretty hard to sort of contribute as much as I can to the sailing of the boat. So it's about being very specific about what you've got to work on, and knowing what the next decision is, and try and focus on that, and then fit that around the sailing.
Someone said to me, actually before the race started, they were describing what it was like on board, and as you said, it's really difficult just boiling water, and you need to boil water obviously for your food and your drink and everything else. And they were saying that actually making a cup of tea or a drink is actually becoming a tactical decision, because you actually have to sometimes slow the boat down to do it. Yeah.
I mean, we're getting better and better at sort of doing things at speed, but sometimes it's like,
But do you think that's going to change? I get the feeling that we're on the cusp of things will change going forwards, because you're being held back now. I mean, we can't disinvent the speed that these boats are doing.
No.
So somehow we've got to cope with how do we cope. Do you think we're going to see quite a lot of changes in the way boats are set up ergonomically? We're going to have sort of Recaro style bouncy powerboat seats and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think we're going to see more and more of that stuff, and I think we sort of, I guess in the sailing we've done in this class, we sort of scratched the surface. But I think as we go faster and faster, then it becomes more and more important, and being comfortable and being able to focus and conserve your energy and not get too beat up on the boat becomes a real performance gain. So rather than look at things from just a weight perspective and all this stuff is heavy or whatever, it's going to be about how do we make these boats more comfortable, make them easier to live on, and just allow people to push harder. As we push the threshold of how fast we can go on these boats, it's going to get to the point, it's like, oh, how can we do it? And not beat ourselves up too much. Yes. And that's going to be a real performance gain. Yeah.
And how much of this increase in performance would have been possible had you not have been fully protected, had you got exposed cockpits and you're outside?
I think, in this class in particular, where we have quite low freeboards and what have you, that'd be absolutely brutal to sail if you were on deck.
Do you think you could even do it?
I'm sure people would have a go, but it would be pretty uncomfortable. Yeah, I mean, we sort of trade one thing for another, but it's being inside. Yeah, you're a lot better protected. You feel a lot safer, and I guess that gives you the confidence to push in certain conditions as well.
Does it feel a bit? I know I sailed with you guys at the start, or one of the prelim things, and I was really struck by how you do feel cocooned in there, but actually you feel rather isolated from the elements as well.
Yeah.
How long has that taken to get used to the sort of sailing from inside all the time?
Yeah, it's definitely taken some getting used to. It's amazing just when you take away the wind off your face how unnatural sailing suddenly feels. But you, like any boat, you learn to feel the boat, and you kind of feel what it needs and what's going on, and whether you feel it through the bum or the sheet you have in your hand, you sort of use your other senses to kind of get that back. And but it's definitely strange, and obviously there's times when it's great to have the roof, and there's times when you're in the equator and it's 35 degrees, you wish you could chop it right off.
So does it work the other way, I wonder, where actually because you're not thinking about being smashed in the face by salt water doing 30 knots as it comes over the top, or the wind, you can actually feel the boat in a way that you haven't been able to feel it before?
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. I think, for sure, and I think it gives you the ability to keep pushing when you are going fast, and just keep letting the speed roll up rather than bracing for impact or or something like that. We are able to sit there, and we're able to do it for long periods as well. I think when you're driving on a 570 or a boat like that, there's probably a limit to how long you can do it when you're getting belted by waves every few seconds. Whereas with only 4, we are forced to sort of spend longer times, but we can sit there with control of the boat for hours on end.
You talked about being beaten up. Of course, you had the worst possible situation where you hit something and had a Talk us through that.
No, we were very unfortunate to have a pretty massive impact. It slowed from 28 knots to 2 knots in fractions of a second. And yeah, I guess it's like analogous to driving a car into a wall or something like that. And we were lucky that the injuries on board weren't worse. Unfortunately, Amory's fractured his shoulder, and Charlie Dallan took a nasty bump to his head, but luckily came good a few hours later. But no, it was a good reminder of the fact that we need to be a lot more conscious about safety on board, and there's probably a lot of times where we should be wearing helmets and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we've seen helmets and stuff become fairly commonplace in things like SailGP and America's Cup, and on these boats now, some of the speeds we're doing are not far off, and it's in an offshore context with a lot more sea state and a lot further away from help or a safety boat. So I think moving forward we're definitely more conscious of making sure we look after ourselves offshore.
What took the impact?
I think whatever we hit the keel, which I think again we were quite lucky, because I think had we hit something on the foils, then the consequences could be a lot worse, both in terms of competitiveness and the potential it had to do damage to the boat. But no, we're very lucky. We got off pretty much unscathed, and we're able to keep racing.
That is miraculous, isn't it, really? Because not only the underwater things, but the extra load it puts on the topmast backstays and all the other blocks and
and we've actually discussed about the loadings, and the team have obviously done a very diligent job of looking at all the loadings. Yeah. I think maybe one of the things that helped the rig is we're sailing so fast with the apparent wind so far forward that actually the rig didn't load up as much as you'd expect it. But it's an interesting thing,
Yeah.
Even though we were going 133 wind angle, the apparent wind angle was 45 or 50 or something like that. So.
Yeah, interesting. And and on that trip, you've done many transatlantics. You've been around the world many times as well, and lots of other stuff in between. How would that rate as in the sort of scale of difficulty or uncomfortable ride? Where does that rate?
Oh, it's definitely one of the legs I remember. It was it was a pretty exciting trip across. Certainly, I think the transatlantic's always a really interesting leg in this race. It's like always the last big transocean leg, but it's also a point where the legs get shorter. So there isn't time to measure your pace, or there's not time, not necessarily time if you get behind to have an opportunity to come back. So you've really got to step with your best foot forward and push all the way from start to finish. So I think because of that we saw a really fast-paced leg and a lot of intensity. We were lucky to have some pretty special conditions as well. But I think irrespective, I think we would have seen a really intense leg in any case. So.
It seems, when we look at the record, ultimately the 24-hour record didn't go to you guys, somewhere between Wholesome and Malizia. But when you look down the list over the last 29 years, out of 10 record-breaking runs, 8 of them have been during the Whitbread or the Volvo.
Yeah.
Is there anything insignificant in that? Because normally we're used to hearing about record runs where people are holding back for the right weather, waiting to go, get it precisely right, bang. But in this case, you're on a race. You knew when you were going to start 2 years ago. Is there anything significant in why this race is so good at setting that record each time?
I think it's because when the conditions do line up, you've got really good teams, like good group of sailors pushing a boat really hard in a really competitive environment, and I'm sure that adds a lot of performance to the boat. So perhaps that's the reason why. I've been lucky enough to be involved in a few of these races and a few of these 24-hour records, and it's always a case where you're at the time normally you're focusing on the boat that's closest to you, or trying to get away, or trying to secure some points in the leg, and you get partway through, and then suddenly you realise actually you're doing something on a boat that's never been done before. So it's pretty exciting.
We're also used to, on this particular leg, looking at the effect of the Gulf Stream in helping you get that extra 1 or 2 knots. Would it be true to say that actually now, with the performance of these boats, the faster they go, actually that extra 1 or 2 knots becomes less relevant now?
No, that's true, I guess. And we obviously, spent a lot of time looking at the Gulf Stream and whether we wanted to use it or not, actually, for this leg. Whether we'd need it to help us to get to the new weather and to get through a trough line or something like that. But we're also very conscious that actually we didn't want to be anywhere near the Gulf Stream if we were going to be going upwind or close reaching, because we didn't want the sea state. So whilst the current can be helpful, if it comes at the cost of a lot more sea state, certainly with these boats, it's not such an attractive offer.
Your race so far seems to have taken a change. Certainly in the last couple of legs, you won the last two, but the reliability of the boat seems a lot better now. You had a horrible run of breakages and the rest of it early on. What's changed?
Yeah, I mean the team's done a fantastic job of just constantly upping the level of the boat. We've had some reliability issues along the way, and some of that's like learning about the platform and it being pushed harder than it has been before. Some of these things were a little bit unlucky. Some of them were user error, and then we've had to learn from our mistakes. But no, the team's done a tremendous job at really, looking at everything and always trying to find that more reliability, more strength. We've obviously on board, we're always thinking about how we do things on board and how to best look after the boat. But it's really been a combination of those two things that sort of helped up our reliability. And I'm very happy to say in this last leg, we didn't open the toolbox once in a whole leg, where the average speed was well over 20 knots. So it's it's a testament to the whole team that we've got to that stage.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we're standing in front of the boat, and the scissor lift has been going up and down for the last 48 hours. But talk us through the kind of things that happen that you have to do in order to check, because it's pretty thorough and detailed check, isn't it?
Yeah, no, the team's incredibly thorough checking over the boat. Whenever it comes out of the water, or even when it doesn't, everything gets NDT'd, the foils, the hull, all ultrasounded, the rudders, all of these things get checked, all the sails come off the boat, they'll go to the loft, they get a thorough check over and reinforced or repaired or whatever. Or the rigging comes off the boat, ropes, so they get checked. Connor's all over the boat looking at all the electronics, like everything from top to bottom really gets checked. And and with all the NDT data and stuff, we have a really good baseline on where the boat is. So as soon as anything changes, we know. And in the hardware department, Finn has a record of absolutely everything that comes off of the boat, when things were serviced, when this ball bearing was changed or whatever. So there's actually a tremendous database now of knowledge about this boat and how it performs, and if something's degrading or changing slightly differently to what we're used to, the guys are really good at picking it up.
And the hull I saw them yesterday scanning the whole hull. I mean, that's obviously not a new thing. That's been around for quite some time, but that's quite a detailed operation as well, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And but it's something, with all the slamming we do, we really feel we need to do regularly. And as I say, the team now have a really good baseline of the status of the boat, and as soon as any of these things changes, they can pick it up and do repairs before things get worse or propagate or something like that. So I think it's really important just making sure we're always in a good position and we don't miss anything, and things can deteriorate and end up in a bigger repair later. So.
I've forgotten which leg it was now, but you had problems with, I think it was the first leg. Was it the first leg you had problems with the foils? You started to get some delamination.
Yeah.
And that was with your second set of
Yeah.
foils, wasn't it? Then you've changed back to the earlier foils.
Yeah.
The boat seems to be pretty quick.
Yeah, we're pretty happy. It was nice to have the set of foils that we started the race on went back into Newport, and actually again the shore team did an incredible job, because they turned up at the 11th hour, and the guys had to work all night to get them in and get them race ready. It was always our plan to put them back in when we could get them to where we were and have the time to put them back in the boat. So it was nice to get back to our original set. But I think we found a little bit more performance with that. We didn't have a lot of data points on them before the race, and we were quite comfortable using our other ones. But I think what we have seen is there's a little bit more performance in these.
Well, that's a good point, an interesting point, because the next thing I was going to ask you was, how much do you think as a fleet or as a class is being learned about these foils now? You said you didn't have a lot of data points on them. I guess that would probably be true for a lot of the boats, really. It's such new technology. But how steep is that learning curve, and how much is being learned? I
think, it's a fascinating class to be involved with, because I think at this stage, the learning curve is still pretty vertical. And there's actually still a lot of freedom in the design of these boats. And I think it's a really exciting time. We're seeing so many these newer mocha boats being built, primarily for this next one-day cycle, but it's a real range of designers and naval architects and stuff like that. So I think it's an exciting time, and the fact that there's so much variety, or almost more variety in the fleet for this sort of new cycle, a new generation of boats, kind of means that it's even less clear what the right answer is. So I think it's a really exciting time. So you see these, you see scow boats, you see boats more designed for Atlantic sailing, where you choose your strength. It's going to be really interesting, and that goes for the foil, like hull design, foil design, all of these things.
And how valuable is this race now? Just looking ahead for, I know you're not competing in it, well, not that we know of as yet, but the Vendée Globe.
I'm happy to sell my friends.
You're not even tempted now you know what the boat will do?
Maybe I'm less tempted now I know what the boat will do.
But how valuable do you think that, presumably it is, very, very valuable data for anybody who's, I mean, there's only 4 boats in it that are well, 5 boats, but potentially up for it. But presumably that's very, very valuable data for anybody who's contemplating a Vendée Globe campaign. And there's presumably quite a lot of rather envious teams who are not doing it, thinking we could do with that data.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's probably quite a lot of teams sitting in the Lorient area in France and looking at this race going on and thinking, yeah, it's a pretty attractive prospect to have the opportunity to put real racing miles on a boat in the Southern Ocean, but in a context that's not as full on or as solo as the solo in the Vendée Globe. I think the one thing that this fleet does is once every 4 years they go to the Southern Ocean, but they have very little time down there otherwise. So to have the opportunity to learn about their boats in those conditions, I think would be really valuable. And actually, I think just all the other racing miles and sailing these boats and pushing them as part of a crew rather than in a very sort of short-handed sailing context, I think it's really interesting.
How much do you think you've come away having learned that you weren't expecting to learn so far?
I've learned an incredible amount, and it's been one of the real sort of exciting points about this race, was getting to a new class and learning it. And yeah, these boats have been fascinating. They're actually incredibly complex boats, both in terms of what you see and like physically, but also the way you have to sail them, because we're sailing a boat that's displacement mode sometimes. Sometimes we're fully foiling. We don't have elevators to sort of control our flight, so we have to do a lot with how we stack the boat and how you trim the sails. So you have all these different modes and how it behaves in different sea states. You have all these, which is kind of been a real sort of minefield to figure out and pick our way through, but it's been a really interesting journey.
How much do you think it's going to change the broader Grand Prix end of the scene? Is there no way back from here now? This is.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I think it's only really a matter of time before we see an Omoka-style boat racing offshore in outside the sort of Omoka class specifically. I'm sure this sort of design is showing everybody what's possible, and yeah, it's only really a matter of time before someone starts putting big foils in things.
Thanks very much for telling us about that fascinating stuff.
Nice.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Simon.
Matt.